My parents ditched my baby shower for my sister's trip. "She's fragile," Mom texted. I said, "Okay." Then she tried draining $5,000 from me. I froze everything. She panicked, but I wasn't done. Every family has a designated role for each child, whether the parents want to admit it or not. In my family, the roles were assigned early, and they were carved in stone. I am Abigail. I am 31 years old, married to a wonderful man named Derek, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the family shock absorber. I am the resilient one, the independent one, the daughter who never needed checking on because, in my mother's exact words, I always figure things out. My younger sister, Chelsea, is 27. She is the fragile one. The delicate flower that requires constant watering, a perfect greenhouse environment, and absolute protection from the harsh realities of the real world. Our parents, Evelyn and Harrison, made it their life's mission to be Chelsea's shield. The contrast in how we were raised wasn't just a subtle difference in affection, it was a loud, glaring system of inequality. I learned very early on that if I wanted something, I had to earn it. If I fell down, I had to dust myself off. There is a specific memory that perfectly captures the dynamic of our household. When I was 22, I was trying to finish my degree. I was working 2 grueling jobs, serving tables at a diner from 6 in the morning until noon, then rushing to campus and later working the closing shift at a local bookstore. I barely slept. I ate ramen noodles and day-old bagels. One month, my beat-up car broke down, and the mechanic handed me a repair bill for $800. I didn't have it. I swallowed my pride and called my parents, asking for a small loan. Just a loan. My mother, Evelyn, sighed heavily into the phone, told me that money was tight, and reminded me that building character through adversity was a good thing. I ended up selling my laptop and writing my final papers on a library computer. That same year, Chelsea, who was also 22 at the time, managed to rack up $10,000 in credit card debt. She wasn't buying textbooks or paying for emergency car repairs. She was buying designer handbags, expensive makeup, and funding weekend trips to music festivals with people she barely knew. When the collection agencies started calling the house, Chelsea had a massive, theatrical crying fit in the living room. She claimed she was suffering from severe anxiety and that the pressure of her part-time job as a barista was ruining her mental health. Did Evelyn and Harrison tell her to build character? No. They drained their emergency savings account, paid off every single cent of her $10,000 debt, and Evelyn even booked Chelsea a weekend spa retreat so she could decompress from the trauma of her own reckless spending. I watched this happen from the sidelines. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a tantrum. I just quietly absorbed the lesson. I learned to stop asking for help, not because I was inherently stronger than Chelsea, but because I knew the answer would always be a variation of the same excuse. Chelsea needs us more. Chelsea is sensitive. You are strong, Abigail. You can handle it. I carried that narrative with me for years. I built a successful career. I married Derek, who is the most grounded and supportive partner I could ever ask for, and I kept my relationship with my parents surface level. I thought I had made my peace with the fact that I would never be their priority. I thought my expectations were already so low that they couldn't possibly disappoint me anymore. But I was wrong. The universe has a funny way of testing your boundaries, and my ultimate test came during the most vulnerable time of my life. Getting pregnant was supposed to be the start of a beautiful, peaceful chapter for Derek and me. We had planned for this. We had prepared a nursery, read all the books, and saved our money diligently. But my body had other plans. At 24 weeks, I was officially diagnosed with severe gestational diabetes and early signs of preeclampsia. My doctor sat us down in his office, his face entirely serious, and explained that my blood pressure was dangerously high. I was put on strict bed rest and a highly restricted diet. I had to monitor my blood sugar constantly, pricking my finger multiple times a day. The swelling in my feet and legs was so painful that some days I could barely walk to the bathroom. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the looming anxiety of a premature birth. The doctor warned us that if my blood pressure didn't stabilize, they would have to deliver the baby early. We were staring down the terrifying possibility of an extended stay in the neonatal intensive care unit. Anyone who knows anything about the American healthcare system knows that the NICU can bankrupt you. Derek and I sat at our kitchen table one night, crunching the numbers. We managed to scrape together a medical safety net of exactly $8,000. It was every spare cent we had, safely tucked away in a high-yield savings account, just in case our little girl needed extra medical help to survive her first weeks in the world. When I told my mother about the complications, I expected, foolishly, a glimmer of maternal instinct to kick in. I thought maybe, just maybe, the prospect of her first grandchild being in danger would shift her focus. Evelyn was enthusiastic, but it was a performative kind of enthusiasm. She promised she would be there for me. She insisted on co-hosting my baby shower, claiming she wanted to make it the most beautiful event of the year to make up for all the times she hadn't been around. She talked about ordering custom cupcakes, picking out expensive floral arrangements, and inviting all the extended family. For a brief, naive moment, I let myself believe her. But then, Chelsea had a crisis. Chelsea had been dating a guy for exactly 4 months. For months. According to Chelsea, they were soulmates. According to reality, they argued every single weekend. When he finally broke up with her, Chelsea reacted as if the world was ending. She quit her job, moved back into my parents' guest room, and refused to leave her bed. Suddenly, my high-risk pregnancy was pushed entirely to the back burner. Whenever I called my mother to update her on my blood pressure or my blood sugar levels, she would interrupt me to talk about Chelsea. Evelyn would sigh into the phone, her voice dripping with exhaustion, telling me how Chelsea wasn't eating, how Chelsea was crying in her sleep, how Chelsea was completely broken. My medical scares became background noise to Chelsea's 4-month breakup drama. I tried to be understanding. I really did. I told myself that a baby shower was just a party and that as long as Derek was by my side, I would be fine. But as the date of the baby shower approached, my mother's involvement completely evaporated. The custom cupcakes she promised to order? Never happened. The decorations? Derek ended up buying them. But Evelyn swore up and down that she and my father would be at my house by 9 in the morning on the day of the party to help set up. She promised she wouldn't let me down. The morning of the baby shower finally arrived. It was a crisp Saturday. I woke up feeling heavy, my ankles swollen and my back aching in a way that made it hard to catch my breath. But I was determined to have a good day. Derek was a whirlwind of supportive energy. He was up at 6 in the morning, vacuuming the living room, arranging pastel pink and yellow balloons, and setting out trays of food we had ordered from a local deli. He even made me sit in a comfortable chair with my feet elevated while he ran around doing everything. By 9 o'clock, the house looked beautiful. There were little floral centerpieces on the tables, a stack of blank advice cards for the guests to fill out, and a mountain of mini sandwiches on the kitchen counter. But my parents weren't there. 9:30 rolled around. Then 10 o'clock. The party was supposed to start at 11. I sat in my chair, staring at the front door, feeling a familiar, cold knot tightening in my stomach. I told myself they were just running late. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe they had stopped to pick up a special gift. At 10:15, my phone buzzed on the side table. It was a text message from Evelyn. I opened it, expecting an apology about a flat tire or a traffic jam. Instead, I read a message that made the blood freeze in my veins. There was no greeting. No, hi sweetie. No, I'm so sorry. Just a cold, blunt statement of fact. It read, "We are boarding a flight to Tulum. Chelsea is fragile. You have a husband. She needs us more." I sat there, staring at the glowing screen. I read the words over and over again. Tulum. A luxury beach resort in Mexico. My parents had packed their bags, driven to the airport, gone through security, and were boarding an international flight with my 27-year-old sister, all while letting me believe they were on their way to my house. They didn't even have the decency to call me and hear my voice. They sent a text. She is fragile. You have a husband. She needs us more. Those words echoed in my head. They were a summary of my entire existence in this family. In my mother's eyes, The fact that I had found a good man who loved me somehow disqualified me from needing my own parents. Because Derek was vacuuming my living room, my mother felt completely justified in abandoning me during a high-risk pregnancy to go sip margaritas on a Mexican beach to soothe a grown woman crying over a 4-month fling. Derek walked into the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, and saw my face. He stopped dead in his tracks. He rushed over, asking me if it was the baby, if I was having contractions, if we needed to go to the hospital. I shook my head slowly. I handed him the phone. I watched his eyes scan the screen. I watched his jaw clench so hard I thought his teeth might crack. Derek is a calm man, but in that moment I saw pure, unadulterated fury in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, probably to offer to call my father and scream at him, but I held up my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I felt a strange, hollow calmness wash over me. It was the feeling of a rope finally snapping after years of tension. I took my phone back from Derek. I opened the keyboard. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't beg them to turn around. I typed 4 letters. O-K-A-Y. I hit send. I put the phone face down on the table, took a deep breath, and looked at my husband. I told him we were going to have a wonderful party and that we were never going to rely on those people for anything ever again. The first guests started arriving right at 11. My 2 best friends from college came bounding through the door with armfuls of gift bags wrapped in shiny pink paper. Then came Derek's family, his parents, his sister, and a few of his aunts. The house quickly filled with laughter, the smell of warm food, and the chaotic, happy energy that surrounds a new baby. Everyone was so genuinely excited for us. I put on the bravest, brightest smile I could muster. I greeted everyone warmly, accepting their hugs and thanking them for coming. But inside, I was operating on pure autopilot. Every time the doorbell rang, a tiny, irrational part of my brain hoped it was Evelyn and Harrison, standing there saying it was all a joke and they wouldn't miss this for the world. But of course, it was never them. The hardest part wasn't the absence itself, it was the questions. Derek's mother, a sweet woman who genuinely loves family gatherings, came up to me with a plate of fruit and looked around the room. She asked, with total innocence, where my parents were. She knew Evelyn had been talking nonstop about co-hosting this party. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had a split second to decide what to do. I could tell her the truth, that my parents had ditched their pregnant daughter to take my heartbroken sister to a Mexican resort. But I knew that if I said the words out loud, the dam would break, and I would start sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't want my baby shower to become a pity party. I didn't want the memory of this day to be tainted by my mother's cruelty. So I lied. I forced a light-hearted laugh, waved my hand dismissively, and said that my father had come down with a terrible stomach bug that morning and my mother had to stay home to take care of him. Derek's mother looked sympathetic, told me to send them her best wishes, and moved on to talk to someone else. I spent the next 2 hours repeating that exact same lie to at least a dozen different people. Every time I said it, it felt like swallowing glass. Derek was my anchor. He never left my side for more than a few minutes. When it was time to open gifts, he sat right next to me, holding my hand. I opened tiny, ridiculous outfits with little strawberries on them. I opened an expensive baby monitor, a mountain of diapers, and a stack of classic children's books. I smiled, I oohed and awed, and I thanked everyone profusely. Derek would catch my eye every so often, giving my hand a gentle squeeze, silently telling me how proud he was of me for holding it together. He ran interference perfectly. Whenever someone lingered too long asking about my family, Derek would smoothly change the subject, offering them more cake or asking their opinion on a nursery paint color. We were a team, surviving a battlefield disguised as a celebration. By 2:15 in the afternoon, the party was winding down. People were eating the last of the cupcakes, drinking coffee, and chatting quietly in the living room. I was sitting on the couch, finally allowing myself to relax just a fraction of an inch. My phone was resting on my lap. Suddenly, the screen lit up with an alert. It was an automated email from my bank. The subject line read in bold letters, Urgent fraud alert. Unusual transfer attempt. I frowned, thinking maybe someone had compromised my debit card at the grocery store earlier that week. I unlocked my phone and opened the email. As my eyes scanned the text, the air completely left my lungs. The email stated that a wire transfer of $5,000 had been initiated from my high-yield savings account. The transfer was flagged and temporarily held because the destination account was unrecognized, and the IP address initiating the transfer was located outside the United States, specifically in Mexico. My brain scrambled to make sense of it. $5,000. That was more than half of my medical safety net. That was the money Derek and I had bled to save for a potential NICU stay. How could someone in Mexico access that account? And then, with sickening clarity, the realization hit me like a physical blow. When I was 18 years old, just starting college, Evelyn insisted we open a joint bank account. She said it was so she could help me manage my finances and transfer me money for textbooks and emergencies. I used that account throughout my early 20s. Over the past few years, as I became entirely financially independent, I stopped using it for daily expenses. However, when Derek and I decided to aggressively save our $8,000 emergency fund, I transferred the money into that old account because it had a grandfathered high interest rate. In the chaos of the pregnancy and my health scares, I completely forgot that Evelyn's name was still legally attached to it. Evelyn was in Mexico. Evelyn had the routing and account numbers. While I was sitting in my living room, lying to my mother-in-law to protect Evelyn's reputation, opening gifts for her unborn grandchild, Evelyn was sitting in a hotel room in Tulum, actively trying to drain $5,000 from my hospital fund. She didn't call to ask. She didn't warn me. She just logged in and tried to take it. The sheer audacity, the absolute lack of shame, was paralyzing. She knew about my preeclampsia. She knew exactly what that money was for. But somehow, in her twisted, enabling mind, whatever emergency Chelsea was having in Mexico was worth stealing her pregnant daughter's medical savings. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was a direct, hostile attack on my family and my unborn child's safety. I didn't hesitate. I didn't shed a single tear. The sadness I had felt all morning completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating, and absolute rage. It was like flipping a switch in a breaker box. Everything went dark and quiet in my mind, leaving only a laser focus on what I needed to do to protect my family. I stood up from the couch. Derek looked up concerned, but I just gave him a tight nod. I walked down the hallway, stepped into our master bedroom, and firmly shut and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled up the bank's emergency fraud hotline number, and hit dial. The representative answered quickly. I didn't mince words. I verified my identity and immediately instructed them to permanently block the pending $5,000 transfer. The representative noted that the other account holder had initiated it, and I told him, in a voice so devoid of emotion it scared even me, that the other account holder was attempting to steal funds designated for medical emergencies without authorization. I didn't stop there. I went scorched earth. I ordered the bank to freeze the entire account immediately. I instructed them to open a brand new, private account solely in my name and transfer every single remaining cent of the $8,000 into it. I canceled the old debit cards. I changed my online banking login IDs, my passwords, my security questions, and my two-factor authentication numbers. I spent 45 minutes on the phone making absolutely certain that Evelyn was stripped of every single ounce of access to my financial life. When the representative finally confirmed that the old account was permanently closed and my money was secure in a vault she couldn't touch, I felt a physical weight lift off my chest. I hung up the phone. I sat in the quiet of my bedroom for exactly 2 minutes, staring at the wall. This was the end. The final straw had not just broken the camel's back, it had obliterated it. I stood up, smoothed down my maternity dress, and unlocked the door. I walked back out into the living room. The party was still going. Derek looked at me, his eyes searching my face for a sign of a breakdown. I walked over to him, wrapped my arms around his waist, and rested my head on his chest. "Everything okay?" he whispered. I looked up at him, And for the first time that entire day, I smiled a genuine, stress-free smile. "Everything is perfectly fine," I said. "Now, cut me a giant piece of that cake." Thank you for following the story this far. If you empathize with Abigail and hate her mother's cruel favoritism, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you so much. Now, let's see what shocking truth Abigail will uncover in the next part. The last guest hugged me goodbye around 4 in the afternoon. Derek and I spent the next hour cleaning up the living room, packing away the wrapping paper, and organizing the gifts in the nursery. My phone had been sitting on the kitchen counter, completely silent. But right around 5:30, the silence broke. It started with a single phone call. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I stared at it as it rang, the sound echoing off the kitchen tiles. I didn't pick up. I just watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Then a text message came through. Then another call. Over the next hour, my phone absolutely blew up. Evelyn must have finally tried to finalize her transaction at the resort, only to discover that the account was gone, her access was revoked, and her daughter was no longer an easy target. When the calls finally stopped, I had 6 missed calls and 4 voicemails. I sat down at the kitchen island, poured myself a glass of ice water, and hit play on the first message. I put it on speakerphone so Derek could hear it too. The first voicemail started with a tone of panicked annoyance. Evelyn's voice came through, slightly muffled, probably speaking from the balcony of her hotel room. She didn't ask how the baby shower went. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She just demanded to know what was wrong with the bank. She said she was trying to process an urgent fee, and the system was locking her out. She told me to call the bank immediately and fix it because it was an emergency. I hit next. The second voicemail, left 10 minutes later, was no longer annoyed. It was furious. Evelyn had clearly realized that the system wasn't broken. I had deliberately shut her out. She started screaming into the phone. The volume was so loud I had to turn the speaker down. She accused me of being a selfish, vindictive daughter. She said that my pregnancy hormones were making me act crazy and irrational. She actually used the words, "How dare you lock me out of my own account when you know Chelsea is going through a crisis right now?" The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. Her own account? She hadn't deposited a single dime into that account in over 10 years. That was my money. That was the money Derek and I had saved by eating cheap meals and skipping vacations. That was our hospital fund. The third and fourth voicemails were just variations of the same hysterical ranting. She told me I had no idea how much pressure she was under. She said she needed that $5,000 for a critical, time-sensitive payment and that I was purposely trying to sabotage the family. She ended the final message by saying that if I didn't wire her the money by Monday morning, she would never forgive me. I deleted the voicemails. I didn't reply to her texts. But as I sat there in the quiet kitchen, a new, nagging question started to form in my mind. Why on earth did my retired parents, who lived comfortably on a pension and Social Security, desperately need $5,000 while on a luxury vacation? They had credit cards. They had their own savings. What kind of urgent, time-sensitive fee requires a cash wire transfer from a daughter's medical emergency fund? None of it made sense. And I knew my mother. Evelyn was manipulative, but she wasn't a gambler, and she wasn't into anything illegal. She was hiding something massive. The next morning, Derek went out to run some errands and pick up groceries. The house was completely quiet. I made myself a cup of decaf coffee, opened my laptop on the dining table, and decided it was time to do some digging. If Evelyn thought she could try to steal from my unborn child and then play the victim, she was dead wrong. I started by calling my cousin Megan. Every family has a Megan. She is the family gossip, the information hub, the person who knows everyone's business because she talks to everyone. I didn't tell her about the bank account. People love to spill secrets when they think you already know half the story. I just casually mentioned that Evelyn seemed really stressed about money lately and asked if Chelsea's breakup was hitting their wallets hard. Megan took the bait immediately. She let out a loud snort and said, "Hitting their wallets? Abigail, your parents are practically bleeding money. Didn't your mom tell you about the real estate agent?" I kept my voice perfectly even. "She mentioned something briefly, but you know how she is. She doesn't like to worry me with my blood pressure." Megan launched into a full monologue. She told me that for the past month, Evelyn had been running around town with a high-end real estate broker. She was desperately trying to secure a property before Chelsea's lease on her current apartment ran out. But Megan didn't know the exact details of the purchase, just that Evelyn was extremely frantic about getting it done quickly so Chelsea would have a fresh start after her traumatic breakup. I thanked Megan, hung up, and immediately called my Aunt Diana. Diana is my father's sister, and she has always been highly critical of how my parents coddle Chelsea. I asked Diana a very direct question. I asked if my parents had taken out a loan recently. Diana sighed heavily and told me that my father had complained to her husband about Evelyn insisting on some crazy financial maneuvers, but he wouldn't say exactly what it was. That was all the confirmation I needed. I opened my web browser and went straight to the public county property tax records. I typed in my parents' names. The search results loaded, showing their current home address. I clicked on the detailed deed and mortgage history. There it was, staring me right in the face. Just 1 month ago, a second mortgage had been recorded against their primary residence. They had taken a massive loan against the equity of the house they had lived in for 30 years. But that wasn't all. I did a reverse search using Evelyn's name to see if any new properties were listed under her ownership. A new address popped up. It was a luxury, 1-bedroom condominium in a brand new, upscale development across town. The purchase date was exactly 3 weeks ago. I sat at the dining table, staring at the bright screen of my laptop, feeling a mixture of absolute disgust and profound pity. The puzzle pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Evelyn hadn't just paid off Chelsea's credit cards again. She hadn't just bought her a car or funded a trip to Mexico. My mother had taken out a high-interest second mortgage on her own home, the home where I grew up, the home my father had worked his entire life to pay off, to buy a luxury bachelor pad for my 27-year-old sister. The condo was purchased solely in Evelyn's name, likely because Chelsea's credit score was completely destroyed from her past debts, but it was obviously bought for Chelsea to live in. And then the final piece of the $5,000 mystery fell into place. Closing on a house isn't just about the purchase price. There are closing costs, attorney fees, title insurance, and in a luxury building like that, there are hefty, upfront homeowner association fees. Evelyn had likely drained every last penny of her liquid savings and maybe even maxed out her credit cards to secure the down payment and the second mortgage. She was completely tapped out. So, when the final bill for the closing costs and the first few months of HOA fees came due, she panicked. She needed cash immediately to prevent the deal from falling through or facing penalties. And where did she turn? She didn't sell her jewelry. She didn't ask Chelsea to get a job. She logged into an old bank account and tried to siphon $5,000 from her pregnant daughter's medical emergency fund. I closed my laptop. I didn't feel angry anymore. Anger requires a level of emotional investment that I no longer possessed for these people. I just felt a cold, hard detachment. While I was sitting at my kitchen table with a calculator, clipping coupons for baby formula and researching the most affordable diapers, my mother was mortgaging her own roof to buy a luxury apartment for a grown woman who refused to work. While I was terrified of going into premature labor and facing a mountain of hospital bills, my mother was desperately trying to steal my safety net to pay for her golden child's homeowner association fees. When Derek came home with the groceries, he found me sitting quietly in the living room. I told him everything. I laid out the timeline, the property records, the second mortgage, and the reason for the $5,000 theft. Derek is a peaceful man, but hearing the full extent of my parents' betrayal made him physically sick. He hugged me tightly and told me that they would never be allowed near our child. I agreed. We were done. But I didn't confront Evelyn. I didn't call her to scream. I knew I didn't have to. The house of cards she had built was so fragile, so entirely dependent on Chelsea's unpredictable behavior, that I knew it was only a matter of time before it all collapsed on its own. I just had to sit back and watch. 3 days after the baby shower, the tone of the messages hitting my phone changed drastically. The furious, demanding voicemails from Evelyn completely stopped. Instead, they were replaced by a series of frantic, panicked text messages. But she wasn't panicking about me. She still hadn't asked a single question about my pregnancy or my health. She was panicking about Chelsea. The messages started trickling in on a Tuesday morning. Have you heard from your sister? Is Chelsea answering your calls? Please tell me if she posted anything on social media. I ignored them, assuming it was just another one of Chelsea's theatrical episodes where she locks herself in a room to make everyone worry about her. But later that evening, my cousin Megan called me, practically vibrating with gossip. Megan told me that the trip to Mexico had ended in a bizarre, abrupt disaster. My parents and Chelsea had flown back to the States together, but when they landed at the airport, Chelsea didn't even wait for my father to get the car from the long-term parking lot. Without saying a word to Evelyn, Chelsea grabbed her suitcase off the baggage carousel, walked straight out the sliding glass doors, and got into an Uber. Evelyn had tried to chase after her, shouting her name, but Chelsea just slammed the car door and rode away. Evelyn assumed Chelsea was just exhausted and had gone straight to the new luxury condo to sleep. Evelyn had spent weeks decorating that condo, picking out the beige couch, the floating shelves, and the expensive indoor plants, all paid for with her second mortgage money. She thought Chelsea was going to be eternally grateful. But when Evelyn drove over to the condo the next morning to drop off groceries and check on her, Chelsea didn't answer the door. Evelyn called, texted, and left voicemails. Nothing. Absolute radio silence. Chelsea had taken the keys, moved into the fully furnished, fully paid-for apartment, and completely cut my parents off. I listened to Megan tell the story, and I couldn't help but let out a dry, humorless laugh. It was poetic justice in its purest form. Evelyn had sacrificed her relationship with me, jeopardized her own financial future, and tried to steal my medical funds, all to buy the loyalty of a daughter who didn't actually care about her. Chelsea didn't love Evelyn. Chelsea loved what Evelyn could buy her. And now that she had the ultimate prize, a free luxury apartment, she had absolutely no use for her mother anymore. The situation escalated rapidly over the next 48 hours. Evelyn was losing her mind. She had never been frozen out by Chelsea before. Chelsea had always been the one crying for help, begging for money, demanding attention. This sudden, cold indifference was destroying Evelyn's entire sense of purpose. On Thursday night, the final piece of Chelsea's betrayal was revealed. Megan sent me a screen recording of Chelsea's private Instagram story, the one that was restricted to her close friends list, which obviously excluded Evelyn. I clicked play on the video. The camera panned across the living room of the new condo. I recognized the expensive beige couch Evelyn had bragged about buying. There were empty wine glasses on the coffee table. The camera then flipped to show Chelsea sitting on the floor, holding a glass of red wine, laughing loudly. Next to her, with his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, was a man I had never seen before. He was entirely bald, shirtless, and covered in intricate tattoos from his neck down to his wrists. Chelsea leaned into him, kissed his cheek, and smiled into the camera like she didn't have a care in the world. The caption written across the bottom of the video read, "Finally at peace. New home, new beginnings. No more toxic pressure. Just us." Toxic pressure. That was what Chelsea called a mother who mortgaged her own home to buy her a free place to live. I stared at the tattooed guy in the video. Chelsea had been crying over a breakup less than 2 weeks ago. Now, she had already moved a complete stranger into the apartment Evelyn was paying for. I found out later from Aunt Diana just how bad things had gotten on Evelyn's end. Evelyn had driven to the condo every single day. She had stood in the hallway, pounding on the door, crying and begging Chelsea to let her in. She had left Tupperware containers full of homemade lasagna on the welcome mat, only to find them still sitting there, spoiling in the hallway, 2 days later. Eventually, Evelyn's panic turned into delusion. She convinced herself that Chelsea was being held hostage by the tattooed man. She actually called the local police department and requested an emergency wellness check. 2 officers were dispatched to the luxury condo. They knocked on the door, and Chelsea answered it, perfectly safe and perfectly sober. According to Diana, the police officers called Evelyn back an hour later. They informed her that her daughter was in good health, was not in any danger, and had explicitly requested that the officers issue a verbal warning to Evelyn to stop harassing her and showing up uninvited. The police had to tell my mother to leave her own golden child alone. The humiliation must have been absolute. Evelyn had bought the cage, but the bird had flown away, and the bird had taken the keys. I was 38 weeks pregnant when Evelyn finally showed up at my house. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Derek was at work, and I was sitting in the nursery, organizing a drawer full of tiny socks. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any packages, so I checked the security camera on my phone. It was Evelyn. She was standing on the front porch, and she looked terrible. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the span of 2 weeks. Her hair was unkempt, she wasn't wearing any makeup, and the dark circles under her eyes were bruised and heavy. In one hand, she was holding a pale yellow, hand-knitted baby blanket. In the other hand, she was clutching a thick manila folder. I walked slowly to the front door, my heavy belly making every step ache. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, but I kept my hand firmly on the handle. I didn't step aside to let her in. I just stood there, staring at her, waiting. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't apologize for missing the baby shower. She didn't apologize for trying to steal $5,000. Her brain simply couldn't process her own wrongdoing. She held out the yellow blanket and the manila folder like they were some kind of diplomatic peace offering. "Abigail, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't want to lose both of my daughters." I looked down at the folder. I knew exactly what was inside. It was the mortgage paperwork. She wanted to show me the documents, to prove to me how much debt she was in, hoping I would feel sorry for her. Hoping I would validate her victimhood. I looked back up into her eyes, and my voice was completely steady, completely devoid of warmth. "You didn't lose both of your daughters, Evelyn. You threw one away." Her face crumbled. The tears finally spilled over her cheeks. She tried to push the folder toward me, stammering about the interest rates, about how the bank was demanding payments she couldn't make, about how Chelsea had blocked her number and changed the locks on the condo. I didn't take the folder. I just looked at it, shaking my head slowly. "I know about the second mortgage. I know about the condo. I know about the $5,000 you tried to steal from my hospital fund to pay the closing costs." Evelyn froze. The realization that I knew everything, that all her secrets were laid bare, seemed to physically shrink her. I didn't yell. Yelling implies passion, and I had no passion left for her. "You are holding paperwork for a luxury apartment that you bought for a woman who called the cops to get rid of you," I said coldly. "And you paid for it with the equity of the house you live in. You are going to need that condo, Evelyn. Because once you default on that second mortgage, the bank is going to take your house. And I will not give you a single dime to save it." I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her apologies. I stepped back inside, shut the heavy wooden door in her face, and threw the deadbolt lock. I walked back to the nursery, sat down in the rocking chair, and went back to folding tiny socks. 2 weeks later, my daughter decided it was time to enter the world. My water broke at 2 in the morning on a Sunday. Derek drove me to the hospital, his hand gripping mine the entire way. The labor was incredibly difficult. My blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels, just as the doctors had feared. After 14 grueling hours of pushing and monitoring, the medical team made the call to rush me into the operating room for an emergency cesarean section. It was terrifying. The bright lights, the rush of nurses, the cold, sterile room. But Derek was right there, sitting by my head, murmuring promises that everything was going to be okay. And it was. At 4 in the afternoon, they pulled a screaming, healthy, beautiful baby girl from my chest. When I heard her first cry, every ounce of fear, Every ounce of anger and bitterness I had been carrying for the past month simply washed away. I held her against my cheek, feeling her tiny, warm breaths, and I knew that I would burn the world down before I ever let anyone treat her the way my parents had treated me. We stayed in the hospital for 4 days recovering. We didn't call Evelyn. We didn't call Harrison. We didn't post a single picture on Facebook or Instagram. We called Derek's parents, we called my friends, and we soaked in the absolute, uninterrupted peace of our new little family. There was no drama, no crying over Chelsea, no financial stress. It was just us. On the morning of my discharge, a young nurse walked into the room carrying a soft yellow gift bag. She smiled and said it had been left at the front reception desk early that morning by an older woman who didn't want to come back to the maternity ward. The nurse set it on the rolling table and left the room. I knew who it was from. Derek looked at me, silently asking if I wanted him to throw it in the trash. I shook my head, reached over, and pulled out the contents. It was the same hand-knitted pale yellow blanket Evelyn had tried to hand me on my porch. Tucked inside the folds of the yarn was a small, plain white envelope. I opened it. There was no lengthy apology, no demands, no emotional manipulation. Just a single sentence written in Evelyn's shaky handwriting. I know I don't deserve to be there, but I wanted her to have something from me. Mom. I stared at the note. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt a profound, heavy sadness. Not for the mother I had right now, but for the mother she used to be a long time ago, before she let her obsession with saving Chelsea destroy everything else. I folded the note, put the blanket in my hospital bag, and Derek drove us home to start our real life. The first month of motherhood was a blur of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and healing from surgery. But despite the exhaustion, my house was a sanctuary. We were completely disconnected from the chaos of my family. But reality has a way of catching up with people, and for Evelyn, reality hit like a freight train. About 5 weeks after my daughter was born, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a Venmo notification. I picked it up, expecting it to be Derek reimbursing me for a grocery order. Instead, it was a transfer from Evelyn. The amount was $2,000. There was no note attached. Just the money. 10 minutes later, another notification chimed. Another $2,000. An hour later, a final notification arrived for $1,000. $5,000. She had returned the exact amount of money she had attempted to steal from my hospital fund, down to the last cent. I stared at the screen, bewildered. Where did she get $5,000 in cash? I knew her bank accounts were empty. I knew the mortgage payments were drowning her. I didn't text her to ask. I let the money sit in my account, feeling like it was contaminated. A few days later, Aunt Diana called me to check in on the baby, and she filled in the blanks. The story she told me was a masterclass in hitting rock bottom. Evelyn had received a formal default notice from the bank on the second mortgage. They were 90 days behind on payments, and the bank was threatening to begin foreclosure proceedings on their primary residence. Confronted with the very real possibility of being homeless in her late 60s, Evelyn's delusion finally snapped. The maternal instinct to protect Chelsea was completely eclipsed by the survival instinct to protect herself. Evelyn did the only thing she could do. She sold her car, a relatively new sedan, to a used car dealership for cash. She used the cash to pay off the most aggressive creditors and, surprisingly, to pay me back the money she had tried to steal. But the real shock was what she did to Chelsea. Evelyn went to the utility companies and shut off the electricity, water, and internet at the luxury condo, which were all legally in her name. She stopped paying the outrageous homeowner association fees. She called the bank holding the second mortgage and informed them that she could no longer make payments on the property and that they could proceed with foreclosing on the condo. Chelsea, who had been living her best life with her tattooed boyfriend, suddenly woke up in the dark, with no running water and a notice from the HOA taped to her door. Did Chelsea call Evelyn to apologize? Did she beg for help? No. According to Diana, Chelsea simply packed her designer bags, left the condo completely trashed, and moved into her boyfriend's cramped apartment across town without a word. Evelyn finally realized the truth. She had bled herself dry, alienated her eldest daughter, and nearly lost her home, all for a child who wouldn't even pick up the phone to ask why the lights went out. Months passed. My daughter grew, learned to smile, and started sleeping through the night. The silence from my parents stretched on, but it was a comfortable silence. It was the silence of a reset button being pushed. When my daughter was 4 months old, I received a text message from Evelyn. It wasn't demanding. It wasn't manipulative. It was hesitant. I made a batch of chicken and wild rice soup. Can I drop it off on the porch for you and Derek? Only if you want. No pressure. I won't ring the bell. I stared at the message. The power dynamic had permanently shifted. Evelyn was no longer the matriarch demanding submission. She was a woman standing outside a fortress, asking for permission to approach the gate. I showed the text to Derek. We talked about it for a long time. I didn't want my daughter to grow up completely without grandparents, but I also refused to let Evelyn's toxicity seep into our home. We decided to set an ironclad boundary. I texted her back. You can bring it inside, but you can only stay for 1 hour. She arrived exactly when she said she would. When I opened the door, she looked nervous, almost terrified. She stepped inside, immediately took her shoes off without being asked, and handed Derek the container of soup. She didn't rush toward the baby. She didn't demand to hold her. She sat on the edge of the living room couch, her hands folded in her lap, and just watched me hold my daughter. We didn't talk about Chelsea. We didn't talk about the money or the condo or the baby shower. We talked about the weather and how the baby was sleeping. Right before her hour was up, Evelyn looked at me, her eyes filled with genuine, quiet remorse. She didn't make excuses. She didn't say, I'm sorry, but... She just said, I know I broke everything. And I know I can't fix it with apologies. I just want to be here, however you'll let me. I didn't offer her forgiveness. Forgiveness is too cheap. I offered her probation. I told her that she could visit once a week for 1 hour under our supervision. If she ever mentioned Chelsea, if she ever criticized my parenting, or if she ever tried to overstep, the door would be permanently closed. She agreed instantly, nodding her head with tears in her eyes. It has been a year since that day. Evelyn comes over every Tuesday. She folds laundry, she reads books to my daughter, and she follows every single rule Derek and I have set. She is trying. She is really, truly trying. I don't know if I will ever fully trust her again. Some things don't go back the way they were, but she finally sees me. And for now, that might be enough. But I still wonder sometimes. Am I wrong for making my mother strictly earn her place back in my life? Should I have forgiven her sooner, or did I do the right thing to protect my own family and my boundaries? Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming Reddit drama stories. What would you have done if you were in Abigail's shoes? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. See you in the next video.